Hey budding herbalists and gardeners. I'm Maria Noel Groves, author of Body into Balance and Grow Your Own Herbal Remedies. And today we're going to be making a recipe that's actually featured in both books, Brainiac Bonbons. And this is a really simple recipe that we're going to make that incorporates nut butter with honey, makes this really yummy base, and then we're going to add some other herbs to it. And this is a great recipe to do with brain tonic herbs, so we're going to use gotu kola and ashwagandha, but you could also use the same basic recipe with any other herbs that are really safe, tonic, and taste pretty good in that kind of nut butter honey base. And you can certainly add spices and cocoa powder and other things to it to influence the flavor, but we're going to keep this one really pretty basic. So to start off with, the first thing we're going to do is actually powder up some herbs, and often you would just purchase herbs already powdered. So you might have something like this is some ashwagandha powder from Mountain Rose Herbs, and it's nice and powdered, it's perfect, it's easy to make recipes with. But if you're working with herbs from your garden, you're not going to have powdered herbs readily available. You'll have to actually powder them yourself. So I'm going to show you how to do that. It's not always easy, but you can do it. And so let's get that going first. So I have some ashwagandha. Some nice local ashwagandha. I do grow this in my garden, and you'll notice it does look a little different than the stuff that you buy commercially. It's usually a little bit darker when you grow it yourself versus the stuff that you buy that's coming from India. And we're gonna throw it in a grinder and grind it up. Not everything's gonna grind, but we'll at least get some powder out of that, and then we're gonna sift it down so we can get to a finer powder, because when you're eating powders in your products, you don't want all these little twigs and bits and things, and it's even more challenging for something like ashwagandha that's in a root form, so it's really tough, it's hard to grind up. You know, you can get really fancy grinders that work really well. I was pricing out grinders at one point, and to get a small scale hammer mill was about $10,000, which is definitely way out of my budget and probably out of your budgets as well. So we're going to make do with a really simple grinder. You can use like a NutriBullet. I've got the Magic Bullet here, and the Magic Bullet works pretty well. It's not the strongest grinder out there, but it works. And I've noticed that the prices come down a lot in recent years, so now you can get them often for just like $30 or $40, and they have different lids so you can grind a couple things up at the same time. So we've got our grinder. I already did a little bit of grinding earlier, which is why this looks messy. You have two different choices for grinder bottoms, and this one is going to be better, the one that has the tongs that move up a little bit. This one will be better for dried leafy things, something that you really need to kind of kick around a little bit, and when you're doing larger quantities of herbs. The ones that are a little bit shorter are nice for like seeds, if you're doing just a little bit of bark material, if you were maybe like grinding coffee beans. The smaller ones that are like face down are going to work better for that. So we can play around. Actually, either one of these would be a good candidate for the ashwagandha. So we'll start off with this one, but we might actually transition. It is a really noisy process, and you know, traditionally this would be where the mortar and pestle would come out. You might have a nice one with lots of deep grooves so you could really get a good powder, but that's a lot of work. So I don't mind technology, and we're going to use technology here. So we'll get that going. We're going to pour a little bit in here. You'll notice it's kind of powdery as it is. I don't need too much for this particular recipe today. Ashwagandha is an interesting herb. It is, they said that it sort of smells like a horse. I don't think it smells like a horse so much, but it does give you the strength of a horse or a stallion. So it is used for virility and fertility, but it's also really just used for vitality, energy. It's a great brain tonic herb. It's a little bit mood boosting. It's an adaptogenic herb, which is an herb that helps the body adapt to stress. It also is really supportive to the nervous system, which we would call a nervine, and it just has a wide variety of activities. But it is a bit of a nootropic, and nootropic herbs are herbs that kind of improve the cognitive abilities of the brain. And so I'll just actually open that up again so you can have a chance to take a look at the cut and sifted ashwagandha roots. Ashwagandha is definitely more potent if you're using material that's been harvested within the past year. You can use older material, but it's not going to be quite as effective at that point in time. So definitely, if either you grow it yourself or you get it from a local farm that grows it. Here in New Hampshire, we treat it as an annual. In fact, most of the United States, it's going to be treated as an annual, where you would harvest it in the fall and just dig everything up and use the roots. It stinks when it's drying. It gets a little bit mellower as time goes on. So So, and the best way to dry it is without too much heat, but definitely with good airflow, because it could mold if it doesn't have enough airflow. But low heat, shaded spot, you'll retain the most of the properties. But you'll want to dry it by itself because the flavor is so strong it will kind of taint the flavors of other things that are dried with it. But once it's dry, the flavor does mellow a little bit, and it's very compatible with things like nut butter and honey. That's one of the reasons we're going to use it. So we ground it down a little bit, and now I'm going to grind it a little bit more with the other grinder bottom. A cloud of ashwagandha around us. And that's good enough for my purposes today. If I wanted to keep it going, I might get a little bit more ground up, but I really only need about a spoonful or two. And so this is pretty coarsely ground, but you know, there are still, here, let me use the spoon to kind of show you what this looks like. You know, we've got a ground herb, but then we also have a lot of bits and pieces of chunks of root. So we don't want to put that in our bonbons, or we'll be chewing on little pieces of root. It'll be very twiggy. So this is where the sifter comes in. So you can use any kind of fine mesh sifter. Ideally, the finer that mesh, the better. And we're going to put some in here, and then just tap, tap, tap. And whatever, you know, stays too big to grind, you can just throw back in the jar and use that to make tea or some other recipe. So you can make tinctures with it. You can do all sorts of other things, but you just aren't going to want to use it in something where you're going to be consuming it straight, because it'll be too twiggy for you. So we got a pretty nice powder there. And I could go further, but that's plenty for what I need to do right now. And we've got a nice little powder, but there are still a few little twigs in there. So if we wanted to, we could then stiff it one more time, and that will help kind of clear it even a little bit more. And I'm not being perfect about this, but another little sifter strainer. I love these things. You can use them for so many things. So a little tedious, not something I'd want to do on a regular basis, but the powders that you make yourself are going to be so much better quality. Powders are usually the worst quality ingredients that you can buy on the herbal market, because they lose a lot of potency once they're ground up and they have so much exposure to the air. But also it's really easy to hide contaminants, adulterants, or even just poor quality material in a powder, because you just don't have as easy of a time seeing what's really in there. So I usually don't like to purchase powders. Occasionally I do, but really I prefer not to, because quality, identity, contamination, adulteration are just all really common problems, and they lose their potency more quickly. So if you're making your own, you're going to be much better off. So I'm just going to pour some of these other things back into the jar. We'll use those to make tea or tincture some other day. But I've got plenty of ashwagandha powder for the recipe that I'm going to make right now. And then I'm also going to grind up some gotu kola. This is some really beautiful gotu kola. You never get gotu kola that looks like this if you're buying it from the international market. It's like twiggy and kind of like a lighter gray green, and it's got a funny seaweedy flavor, whereas the stuff that you get, that you grow yourself or you get from a local farm, is just going to be really beautiful. And you still do get a lot of stem material, because that's just the way gotu kola is. I actually have some overwintering gotu kola right here, and it's got a lot of stem material, but it's just a lot more vital when you have something that's local. There might be some extra medicinal value that you get out of gotu kola that's grown in a really hot climate, and New Hampshire is not really the hottest climate out there. So what I at least try to do is when I go to harvest it, I try to harvest it on the hotter times of year. And we had some pretty hot seasons this past year, which was perfect for gotu kola. It was really hot and wet and humid. Gotu kola would like to be growing in sewage sludge in India, which does point to other potential quality issues there. So it's another reason why it's nice to grow your own or get it from a trustworthy organic farm. That's probably plenty for today. And we'll grind this one up. And you'll notice that leaves grind up a lot more easily. And you can get much closer to a powder without having as much of the chunky material that's left behind. So we'll get this one going. It's amazing how much they shrink down once they've been ground down. And we're going to be using this right with the other one, so I'm just going to sift it right into the same container. Gotu Kola is a really great brain tonic. You can actually use quite a bit of Gotu Kola. The more you use, the more effective it's going to be, but you can use modest amounts as well. And Gotu Kola is just really good for helping to heal the nervous system, heal nerves that have been damaged even by things like brain trauma, dementia, Alzheimer's. Not that it's a miracle, but it's subtle and profound at the same time. And just a really nice herb too for calming. It's an adaptogen, but a little bit more subtle of an energy source compared to ashwagandha, and helps relieve anxiety, as I just mentioned, but just a really nice cognitive tonic. It's classically used for boosting the brain, and supposedly the reason why elephants have such good memories is because they really like to eat Gotu Kola. So that's enough for today, at least. We'll use that in tea or something later on, and then we'll just kind of re-sift a little bit more. And if I was doing a lot of powders, I would make sure I'm in a well-ventilated room, and I would also wear a mask because you don't want to be inhaling in a lot of particulate matter. We're just doing a little bit here, so I'm not too worried about it. But if you are going to be grinding up and trying to make a whole jar of powder, definitely go ahead and get a nice dust mask to keep that out of your lungs. Here we go. So we've got our 2 herbs. I have a little bit more ashwagandha just because I had more ground up already, but that's fine. And these are our powders that we're going to use in our nut butter. Let's kind of move these to the side so we make some space here. So now we're ready to make our nut butter balls. And so you're going to use, this is on page 112 of Grow Your Own Herbal Remedies, and we're going to use about 2 tablespoons of nut butter. This just makes a small quantity, but you can easily make more. If you want to make a bigger batch, just double it up. But this will give you just a little bit so you can try it out. So I'm just going to kind of eyeball about 2 tablespoons, and you can use any kind of nut butter that you like. In class, we usually will use, just to make a small amount for each student, and we'll use almond butter that I get right from my local co-op and grind it right there, and that comes out really nicely because the oils are all still really mixed in. If you get nut butter and you've got that big thick piece of oil on the, the thick liquid of oil on the top, you're going to want to try to stir that in as best as you can. Or you can pour that out and leave it aside for something else and then just use the drier nut butter inside. But it'll be a little bit too watery if you incorporate all that oil like right away from the top of it. So we've got our nut butter here. Then I'm going to add just a little bit of honey. So it's about 2 parts nut butter to 1 part honey, or to taste. And I'm pretty excited because usually, like I said, I do this with almond butter in my class, but I'm allergic to nuts. And I even have to wear gloves when I do this because I'll break out in a rash in my hands mixing it up with when it's got almond butter or some other nut butter. But I've started making my own nut butter. I'll include the recipe in this video so you'll get to see it later on. But basically I'm using toasted pumpkin seeds with toasted sesame seeds, and then I grind that up with a tiny bit of salt and a very small amount of sugar. And of course you could omit the salt or the sugar if you wanted to. And but it comes out really nice. It actually tastes a lot like Skippy peanut butter, and is really quite lovely. So we're going to make it with that today so that I can actually eat it and I don't have to wear gloves while making it. So I'm just kind of mixing that together. You could taste it, see if it's the right level of sweetness. If you want to add a little bit more, you can't really take it away, but you can add a little bit more nut butter if you want it less sweet, or you can add a little bit more honey if you want it sweet. And then for that amount, you'll use about a good teaspoon of herb material, and you can easily kind of tinker around with that to find out what you like the taste of, and also just measuring it out. So, you know, pay attention to how much herb material you're using, and then later on how many honey nut butter balls you make, and you can figure out approximately what dose you're getting per ball of nut butter ball. But for these herbs, they're pretty tonic, so more or less is not too big of a deal. You'll get a little bit more therapeutic value from higher doses, but it's not, you know, the end of the world if you have a lot or a little. This is also a great recipe to use with like more nutritious herbs. So you could throw nettle in here, or you could do, you know, some other powdered herb, like maybe violet leaves that you've dried and powdered. If you're buying things from elsewhere, maca makes an excellent ingredient for this. Cocoa powder is another really tasty one. If you want something that's more zippy, you could do something like Cotinopsis roots. So you have a lot of wiggle room for playing. You can even do some of the more aromatic herbs like holy basil makes a pretty decent recipe, and also goes quite nicely with the gotu kola. And then I've done this with powdered hawthorn as well as like a heart tonic, which is also a brain tonic too. So this is kind of a nice sort of crumbly consistency. You can play around if you need to add a little bit more honey to make things stick together. But this is pretty good. It's a little on the dry side, but I can actually taste it, which is nice. Oh no, that's really nice. So now I'm going to roll them up into balls, but before I do that, while my hands are still somewhat clean, we're going to throw on some stuff for us to roll it in later, and that's going to give a little bit more flavor, but also help keep them from sticking to one another, help them keep their shape. So you can use whatever you'd like. Some people will use cocoa powder or cocoa nibs, but I really am partial to either toasted sesame seeds because it is something kind of nutty that I can eat, or toasted coconut. And for all these toasted things, when I'm toasting my pumpkin seeds and my sesame seeds for the nut butter, and then also regular sesame seeds and coconut, I just get them from my co-op bulk section raw, and then I'll toast them in a dry skillet until they get a little bit brown, nice and aromatic, and that usually tastes even better than something that you might purchase that's already been toasted. So that's a great way to get a little more flavor out of your ingredients. And it's a little bit better quality than what you would buy. So I'm going to do sesame seeds here. Maybe we'll throw a little coconut in there, but really I love sesame. Toasted coconut, if you're not aware, makes an excellent tea ingredient. So if you have leftover toasted coconut, you don't know what to do with it, you can make desserts with it, but you can also just make tea with it. You can throw it with cocoa nibs, vanilla bean. It also goes really well with rooibos, would be another great ingredient. You can make tropical teas with turmeric and ginger with it, so you can really play around. So I'm just going to roll this up into little balls. And you can make them as big or small as you want, but something that you'd be comfortable eating. A nice dry ball there. And then roll it up in our rolling ingredients, and this will keep pretty well because they're all shelf-stable ingredients. So you can just put them in a tightly sealed container. You can keep them in the fridge if you'd like, or you could even keep them on the counter, but they'll keep their shape a little bit better in the refrigerator. And then this is your little energy snack that also happens to be giving you your medicinal herbs at the same time. This idea is borrowed from Rosemary Gladstar, who's just a fabulous herbalist that I was lucky enough to study with years ago. And she has a recipe for Zoom balls. So she uses all sorts of high caffeine herbs in them as an energy ball. And that's fine, but if I had that much caffeine, I'd probably feel like I was having a heart attack. I'm very sensitive to caffeine. So using these gentler herbs like the ashwagandha and the gotu kola is definitely more appropriate for me personally. And I feel like for a lot of my clients as well. So I don't make these for clients because it's a little bit too tedious of a process, but it's fun to make in class and my students really love them. So those are a few for right now. I'll make more later, but you just go ahead and make them and you've got your snack. So have fun making your own herbal bonbons. If you're feeling really decadent, instead of rolling them in your dry ingredients, you could chill your little nut balls and then dip them in melted chocolate and actually cover them in chocolate and make more like a peanut butter or truffle kind of treat. But that's a little bit more time consuming. It's a little bit more of a dessert. Whereas this, I'm getting some really nice ingredients at the same time. So enjoy your honey nut butter ball bonbons and happy herbal adventures.